Introducing the world's newest, silliest, and hamburger-eatingest clown, Ronald McDonald. Now, where is that clown? Oh, Ronald! 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 Hey, Ronald!
Here I am, kids. Hey, isn't watching TV fun? Especially when you got delicious McDonald's.
Okay, that was real. And I have to be honest, the first time I saw Ronald sitting there in the dark and then the light suddenly came on, my first thought was, why does this look like Freddy Krueger? It felt like I had wandered into an episode of A Nightmare on Elm Street instead of an old McDonald's commercial. That is only my personal reaction, of course. But please tell me I'm not the only one. The tray on his head, the cup over his nose, the food around his waist. He looks less like the Ronald McDonald most of us remember. He looks more like someone who was given 5 minutes to build a clown costume using whatever happened to be inside the restaurant. But once I saw him, I couldn't stop thinking about him because the Ronald I remember looked completely different. I remember the red wig, the yellow suit, the striped sleeves, and those enormous red shoes. I remember a character who seemed polished, cheerful, and completely at home inside the strange little universe built around him. Maybe your Ronald looked like that too. Or maybe you remember him sitting on a bench outside the restaurant. Maybe you remember a birthday party, a playground, or a Happy Meal toy. Maybe you remember one of those television commercials that seemed to appear constantly when we were children. It's strange how clearly some of those details remain. I can remember the colors, I can remember the characters, I can remember the feeling of walking into McDonald's, but I'm not sure I ever wondered where Ronald came from. He was simply there. And when someone has always been there, you don't usually ask how they arrived. You just accept them as part of the world. For decades, Ronald McDonald was one of the most recognizable characters in America. Children knew his face before they understood what advertising was. He appeared on television, inside restaurants, at community events, in parades, on packaging, and beside playgrounds. At some point, he became so familiar that nobody needed to explain him. A hamburger restaurant had a clown, of course it did. But when you step back from the memory for a moment, the idea becomes a little unusual. Why did a restaurant choose a clown? Why did that clown need an entire imaginary world? And how did a character created to sell hamburgers become connected to so many personal childhood memories? Try to remember your first McDonald's, not the restaurant closest to where you live now. Think about the first one that felt important. Maybe you were sitting in the back seat, watching through the window for the golden arches. Maybe someone promised you McDonald's if you behaved during a long shopping trip. Maybe it was a birthday, a weekend with a grandparent, or a reward after school. It may have been an ordinary family moment at the time, but ordinary moments have a way of becoming important once enough years pass. The restaurant probably felt much bigger when you were small. The counter seemed high. The menu glowed above the cash registers. You could smell the French fries before the door opened. There were trays moving across tables, wrappers unfolding, ice rattling inside paper cups, and children examining their toys before they had finished eating. And somewhere nearby, Ronald was usually waiting. He might have appeared in a picture, on the packaging, beside the playground, or in a commercial before you ever visited the restaurant. Sometimes he appeared in person. To a child, none of this seemed particularly unusual. Of course Ronald had friends. Of course they lived in McDonaldland. Of course the Hamburglar spent his entire life trying to steal hamburgers while wearing one of the least convincing disguises anyone had ever seen. That was simply how the world worked.
Get yourself ready for a trip through McDonaldland. Take along a friend and grab a hold of Ronald's hand. Follow Ronald McDonald through the land of apple pie trees. And don't be surprised if you meet Big Mac and Big Cheese. There's thick shaped volcanoes, you'll even find a French fry patch. Now just turn around and see if you won't find a hamburger patch as you're heading for a McDonald's in McDonaldland, a McDonald's in McDonaldland, a McDonald's.
But how much of that world do we actually remember? There was Grimace. There was Birdie the early bird. There were the Fry Kids, Mayor McCheese, Officer Big Mac, Captain Crook, and characters who seemed important for a while before quietly disappearing. Most of us remember pieces rather than complete stories. A color, a costume, a phrase, a playground, a toy we may not even own anymore. McDonaldland exists in memory, almost like a place we visited in a dream. We recognize it, but the details are difficult to hold on to, and that makes Ronald difficult to investigate. He is surrounded by nostalgia, rumors, half-remembered commercials, and stories that have been repeated so many times that they begin to sound true. You may have heard that Ronald was created by one particular performer. You may have heard that the original performer was replaced because of his appearance. You may have heard that Ronald disappeared because children became afraid of clowns. You may even remember hearing that the character was officially retired. Some of those stories contain pieces of truth, others become much less certain when you try to trace them back to their source. That is where this story really began for me. Not with a conclusion, but with a collection of memories that didn't quite fit together. The Ronald in the early footage didn't match the Ronald I remembered. The stories people told about his creation didn't always match one another, and the more familiar the character seemed, the harder it became to separate what people remembered from what the historical record could actually prove. So I started with the footage. No modern explanation, no recreation, just the surviving commercial. And there are details in it that deserve to be noticed before anyone explains them. Look at the restaurant. Look at the television set. Look at the way Ronald introduces himself. Listen to how directly he speaks to children, and look again at that costume. This character does not seem to be entering an established world. He seems to be inventing it while we watch. There is no Grimace, no Hamburglar, no Mayor McCheese, no polished McDonaldland surrounding him. There is only Ronald, the food, the restaurant, and the promise that something fun is about to happen. That feels important, because the version most of us remember arrived after the idea had already begun to change. By the time Ronald became a national figure, he looked more consistent. The costume was cleaner. The colors were unmistakable. The character could appear in different cities, in different commercials, and with different performers while still remaining recognizable. But the figure in this early footage does not look standardized. He looks local, experimental, almost temporary. So where did this commercial come from? The surviving footage dates to 1963 and was shown in the Washington, D.C. television market. The performer inside the costume was Willard Scott. That name may sound familiar. Years later, millions of Americans would know Scott as the cheerful weather presenter on NBC's Today Show. But before that, he worked in local television. And before he appeared as Ronald McDonald, he had portrayed another famous television clown, Bozo. That connection immediately raises another question. Was Ronald McDonald born from a carefully developed national advertising campaign, or did he begin as something much smaller, a local idea, a television experiment, a restaurant trying to find a way to speak directly to children? For now, the documented part is simple. Willard Scott appeared as Ronald McDonald in local television advertisements in 1963. The unusual costume was real. The commercial was real. And the character most of us remember had not yet taken his familiar form. But almost everything that happened around that moment becomes more complicated once people begin retelling it. Who actually created Ronald? Was it Willard Scott? Was it the local restaurant operator? Was it McDonald's? Was it a character shaped by several people over time? Even the word original becomes slippery. Do we mean the first performer? The first costume? The first commercial? Or the first version recognized by audiences across the country? Those are not necessarily the same thing. And that may explain why so many versions of the story continue to circulate. Everyone remembers a different Ronald. Everyone begins at a different point. The company's history begins in one place. The television history begins somewhere else. The national character has another beginning. And our personal memories begin whenever Ronald first entered our own lives. That is how folklore grows around something familiar. Not always because someone deliberately invents a false story. Usually, it happens because a complicated history is gradually reduced to the version that is easiest to repeat. A clown sold hamburgers. Children loved him. Then one day, he disappeared. That version sounds complete, but it leaves almost everything interesting out. It leaves out the local television programs. It leaves out the performers behind the makeup. It leaves out the decisions that transformed an improvised costume into a character who could be reproduced across the country. And it leaves out an even larger question. Why was McDonald's ready for Ronald in the first place? A clown alone could not have created the world people remember. Something had already changed inside the restaurant business. Families were traveling differently. Television was entering more homes. Children were becoming a more visible audience for advertisers. Restaurants were learning that familiarity could matter just as much as food. Ronald arrived at the exact moment when those changes began to overlap. But he was not there at the beginning. Before Ronald, before McDonaldland, and before the Happy Meal, there was a small restaurant in California. Two brothers were trying to solve a practical problem. They wanted to serve hamburgers faster. They simplified the menu. They reorganized the kitchen. They removed anything that slowed the process down. Their idea had nothing to do with clowns, fantasy worlds, or childhood nostalgia. At least, not yet. But the system they created would eventually make a character like Ronald possible. It created an experience that could be repeated. The same food, the same process, the same expectations. And once a company learns how to repeat a meal, the next challenge is much more interesting. Can it repeat a feeling? That is the question waiting beneath the strange costume in the 1963 footage. Ronald may look improvised, but the world forming around him was about to become anything but accidental. And before we can decide what Ronald McDonald truly represented, we need to understand the system that was already waiting for him. That story begins before the clown, before the golden childhood memories, and before McDonald's became the place most of us think we remember. Most stories about Ronald McDonald begin with something people are certain they remember. He was created by the weatherman. He was fired for being too heavy. He disappeared because of a lawsuit. He was retired because of childhood obesity. Then the creepy clown sightings happened, and McDonald's finally got rid of him. You've probably heard at least one of those stories. Maybe you have repeated one. I know I have accepted parts of them without ever asking where they came from. That is the strange thing about Ronald. The rumors do not sound ridiculous. Most of them contain just enough truth to feel complete. But when you place them beside the surviving footage, interviews, company announcements, and court records, they begin contradicting one another. The unsettling part is not that every story is false. It is that almost every story is partly true. Go back to 1963. Willard Scott is sitting in the dark. The light comes on, and there he is. The tray hat, the cup nose, the food around his waist. We know Scott was the performer in those Washington, D.C. advertisements. Scott also said he created Ronald McDonald. Before Ronald, he had portrayed Bozo the Clown on local television. McDonald's used Bozo appearances to attract children and families. When the local Bozo program ended, Scott said the restaurant needed a clown of its own. His solution was Ronald. That sounds like an origin. One performer, one idea, one new character. But the closer you look, the harder it becomes to identify the exact moment Ronald was created. Scott performed the character. Local restaurant operators created the opportunity. Advertising people shaped the commercials. McDonald's owned the name and expanded the idea, and the polished character remembered by most of the country came later. So when someone says Willard Scott created Ronald McDonald, the fairest response may be, which Ronald? The local Ronald? The national Ronald? The costume? The personality? The character children eventually met inside restaurants? They were connected. They were not identical. This is where another familiar story appears. Willard Scott was supposedly removed because McDonald's thought he was too heavy to represent the company nationally. The claim has been repeated in books and articles for years. It fits the kind of corporate story people expect. A local performer helps create something successful. The company takes it national. Then, the original man no longer fits the image. Scott disputed that explanation and referred to other commitments. And in the material I reviewed, I did not find a clean company announcement stating that his weight was the official reason. That does not prove the story never happened. It means the evidence does not allow us to present the most dramatic version as settled fact. Maybe that uncertainty is why the rumor survives. It gives Ronald's transformation a villain, a victim, and a single moment of betrayal. Real history is usually less organized. Scott's local Ronald did not instantly disappear when the national character emerged. For a time, different versions overlapped. So, what really happened to Ronald McDonald? This story began with that strange television appearance in 1963. A clown with a tray on his head, a cup over his nose, and food attached to his costume. From there, Ronald changed into the polished, red-haired character recognized around the world. Willard Scott helped introduce him, but Ronald's familiar appearance was shaped by several performers, designers, advertisers, and costume makers. Then McDonaldland grew around him. Grimace, the Hamburglar, Birdie, Mayor McCheese, the Fry Kids, and the other characters became part of a world that many people still remember from. Commercials, playgrounds, Happy Meals, and childhood visits to McDonald's. But Ronald's disappearance never had one simple explanation. The McDonaldland lawsuit was real. The criticism of advertising fast food to children was real. And the frightening clown sightings of 2016 were real. But none of those events produced a clear retirement or an official goodbye. Ronald simply appeared less often as McDonald's advertising changed, and as the culture surrounding clowns changed with it. He wasn't removed in one dramatic moment. He was redesigned, recast, reduced, and eventually transformed from a character created for children into a nostalgic memory for the adults those children became. Perhaps that is why his story feels so strange. There was no final commercial, no farewell. Most people simply stopped seeing him. And by the time anyone noticed, nobody could agree on what had happened. Now, I want to hear your memories. Which version of Ronald McDonald do you remember? And who was your favorite McDonaldland character? Grimace, the Hamburglar, Birdie, Mayor McCheese, or one of the Fry Kids? Tell me in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe to Paradox Vaults. There are many more forgotten stories waiting inside the vault. Until next time.